almost heaven. West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah River. Life is all there.
Hello again. I'm just a guy who loves to make props and stuff. And in this video, I'm making the Fallout Plasma Pistol.
Country roads take me home to the place I belong, West Virginia.
I love my 3D printer, but ever since I got it, it seems I've been spending half my time on the build in front of a computer. So for this build, I wanted to keep it simple and hands-on with using mainly EVA foam. I found this really good reference picture online which I printed out. And then I used an earlier prop build just to make sure I got the size right. I find that a good place to start off a build is by breaking it down to simple geometric shapes. And I usually start with the biggest piece. This will also be the structure on which I attach all the other pieces. Kinda like how you would build a Lego. By using this plastic container thing as a base, it would make it solid enough, and I could easily cover it with some EVA foam and still have room for some lights and batteries inside. I use contact cement for gluing all the pieces together, and usually I touch with my heat gun, just to save some time. And of course, I always wear a mask when dealing with this stuff. And as simple as that, the base is done. For the next piece, I decided to make a template, since it was more than one piece and I needed them to be uniformed in scale. I made the template out of some cardboard paper. Then I could trace it onto some 5mm EVA foam and cut out the 4 pieces I needed. I used my Dremel to clean up the edges a bit. As much as I can, I try to keep all my measurements as accurate with the printout as possible. The next part I built was also some simple geometric shapes. Just some rectangular and square pieces of 5mm EVA foam. And when you glue them together, they made up the shape I was looking for. I use my heat gun to make the glue cure faster all the time. I don't really think it's to speed up the process, but rather the fact that I'm so impatient to see how it all looks glued together. Whenever you can, it's important to test fit your pieces, to make sure you're heading in the right direction. And hopefully work out any problems before it's too late, or having to do it all over again. I used my soldering iron and a metal ruler to try and copy some of the smaller details by burning in some lines to the EVA foam. Doing stuff like this will really pop and look good once it's time to paint and weather it. For the bottom front piece, I started out with a simple square piece of 10mm EVA foam, which I also burnt some lines into. I found that keeping the same pressure and going slow and steady gives the best and most even results. I also believe that once you get the hang of it, it really looks good and saves you a ton of time as opposed to the alternatives. Then it was time to do some molding with my Dremel. Just rounding off the edges and making all the sides look even. But I think it looks cool. Instead of making another template, I just cut out a piece of the printout. That's one of the big advantages of keeping the same exact measurements. I traced it onto some 10mm EVA foam, and then cut out this would get glued inside the handle and later to the main body. I believe this would make it solid and rigid enough. I only cut out the pieces roughly around the traced area. This is because I make the final cut after gluing all the pieces together. Once the final cut was made, I trimmed off all the edges before doing some more molding with my Dremel and a sanding drum. I have never tried using the soldering iron on EVA foam without using a metal ruler to guide me. But nevertheless, I masked off some guidelines to burn in the details lined in the front of the handle. It was a bit more difficult and you needed a light hand, but it came out looking pretty good. To copy the last detail, I used the tip of my sanding drum. Getting pretty close. Using some more 10mm EVA foam, I cut out the shape of the ventilation thing piece. This was sanded down in the back to follow the contours of the main body. I cut out the window for the front, and then I actually used some styrene foam to get the clean lines of the bars in front. The piece was glued together before attached to the main body. To make the submarine looking windows on the sides, I cut out some pieces of a cardboard dowel with a window in EVA foam. You know, the thing at the end of the tin foil roll. Once the submarine windows were glued in place, I started to work on the lights. I tested out several different LED lights with a piece of 1mm acrylic glass in front, which I sanded down. This matched the look I was going for exactly. I attached wires to all 6 LED lights before hot gluing them in place inside the submarine window, which I had drilled a hole in the middle. I connected all the wires, put in some batteries, and hot glued in place a simple on-off button. It's amazing how a prop comes to life with some cool lights. The next pieces I made were the things that would connect the hose. It took some time to fabricate all 12 pieces, but as you can see, they were made out of simple shapes cut out of EVA foam. I made sure to test fit all the parts along the way, and the bottom connectors were slightly different than the top pieces. Then it was time to make the back lid, so to say. Fortunately, the plastic container I used at the very beginning of the build had a lid on it. I decided to use this as it was the perfect base to make a back lid that would easily come off again when I needed to replace the batteries. I glued on 2 layers of EVA foam at the back of it, and then I sculpted the shape I wanted using my Dremel again. Once I had the piece rounded off, I glued on some more EVA foam details. I also burnt in some holes with my soldering iron, which I later planned to attach some real screws into. And of course, I made sure to test all the different parts before moving on to the next piece of fabrication. Next, I tackled the chimney looking parts on top of the submarine windows. I cut down some more pieces of the cardboard dowel tin foil thing. Then I closed off the top and bottom with some more EVA foam, before adding a few thin strips along the sides, always looking to copy what I saw in the pictures. Using my soldering iron, I burnt a hole in the middle. Then I used a piece of a thick straw stuck in the center of the top. It came out looking pretty close to the original shape. I used a small round piece of EVA foam between the 2 parts and glued it all together with some super glue, making sure I got all the angles right. I believe the rectangular piece at the top back end is the plasma power cell. It's a really simple shape. I just used 2 thick pieces of EVA foam glued together, with some more pieces of foam for detailing. The last pieces of details were made all using EVA foam, some more cardboard dowels, and even a lip balm cork for the front of the barrel. The The smaller pieces were all glued on using some super glue. I wanted to paint the tubes separate, but I still had to attach them while gluing on the connectors, just to make sure I got all the angles right. And finally, the last piece of this build was this bottom part. Now, since I had so much practice using my soldering iron on this prop, I decided to score in some lines instead of making all the small pieces separate. It was a pretty tedious work and it took a while, but it was worth the effort to make all the details. Once all the 4 pieces were done, I cut out some smaller pieces that would go in between the parts. Did some test fitting and then I glued it all together. The handle was finally attached using a lot of hot glue to make it solid enough. And that was the last part of the build. I believe it ended up looking pretty great, and it felt good to make something from scratch without using any 3D printed parts for once. If you want to see the paint job I did on this prop, then just click on the second part of this video, and I will show you how I did it. And that was it for this video. I hope you liked it. If so, just click on the subscribe button, and I will try and share my next build with you. Thanks for watching.